Okay, today we're going to replace an alternator on a 2002 Honda Civic. This has the 1.7 liter. And this should work for Civics 01 to 05. First thing you need to do is disconnect the battery. We're just going to take the battery out. Okay, our first step here is to get the power steering pump out of the way and get the power steering belt off. So to do that, we're going to focus here. This is a 12 millimeter nut. And then you have a 10 millimeter for this plate here, and then you have this wing nut, which is for the tensioner. So I'm gonna do the 12 millimeter nut. Just make sure that cracks. I'm gonna do the tensioner with a pair of pliers. We've had this off before, so there's anti-seize on this. Makes it easier. Get that loose. Do by hand. And I'm gonna just take this all the way off. The wing nut for the tensioner. This is a nut with a washer on it for the upper bolt and tensioner. It's one unit. It's a tensioner and a bolt for the upper part of the power steering pump. Okay, our power steering fluid reservoir is zip tied here, so I'm cutting this. And I'm going to slide it off this bracket just so I can free this up and give myself some more room, because we are going to be going after this lower bolt on the power steering pump, which is right there. It's right sort of under the belt, the power steering belt. That's the lower power steering pump bolt. Okay. So I'm on the bolt. I'm using a 3/8 ratchet with a 12 millimeter shorty. It's loose enough to where I'm going to slip this belt off now. So this power steering belt, this is the outermost belt closest to the tire on the crankshaft pulley. So now I'm going to get in there with my hand. And that's just a nut. So down here, that nut is paired with this bolt that's gonna come out this way. I'm going to take this little bracket off. It's a 10 millimeter bolt, small one. 2 washers on it, shorty bolt. Okay, now that that's free, you can lift this whole thing with the power steering fluid reservoir and the pump. As one unit, you can lift them up. Set them over here. Just show you again. Here's the lower bolt for the power steering pump. It's on the lower part of the bracket. This bolt goes in from the left, and this 12mm nut goes on the other side. That's the lower. Okay, our next step is we need to disconnect the battery cable from the alternator and the wiring harness clip from the alternator. Okay, now we're back around to the back side of the alternator. And what we're gonna do now is we're gonna focus on this rubber boot here. We're gonna move this rubber boot to the side. And we're gonna expose the nut that connects the battery cable to the alternator. We're gonna take this nut off. I'm using a 3/8 ratchet and a short 10mm. So you gotta really pull the boot away. Can't see it, but I'm gonna get the rest of the nut off my hand because I don't want to drop it. It's a 10mm nut. So then you just have a terminal connector that comes over that tiny stud. And now I'm not going to force it off, but what we're going to do is we're going to slide this electrical assembly off. So this is how you do it. So if you follow my screwdriver, there's a tab right here. You can see me flicking it. And what you're gonna do is you're gonna come in with your finger, you're gonna push the tab down towards the ground, and then you're gonna slide this whole block towards the exhaust manifold. What that did was it slid this electrical assembly block off of this tab. Here's the square that was it on. So this that I'm scratching, this small bracket is bolted onto the casing of the alternator. And before we install the new alternator, we're going to take this old bracket off of the old alternator and install it onto the new alternator. When I slid this off of this bracket, since I already had the nut off of that battery cable, it finished my job of removing the cable from this electrical post on the back. So now we have, here's the battery cable terminal and this block. So the next thing we need to do is remove the wiring harness clip from the back of the alternator. So same thing, we need to get this boot. A little tight in here, but the green is what we're after, this green clip. So we need to slide this boot off, work the boot back with a screwdriver and your fingers, pull it back, and now we want to compress this tab. This tab here, it's got ridges on it. We're going to push that in towards the body of the clip and slide the clip toward us. I'm going to try it with my fingers, but you might need a tool to help you press the tab. So with clips, you want to press it, and then it's just a lot of jiggling up and down, back and forth. Okay, and the clip is now disconnected. So everything is disconnected from the alternator electrically. Next thing we're going to do is work on getting the alternator untensioned to be able to slip the belt off. Before we work more on the alternator, I'm gonna go ahead and remove the bracket for the power steering reservoir. It's a 12 millimeter. I'm just using a wrench. One bolt, 12 millimeter. Okay, now we're gonna untension the alternator to remove the alternator belt, and then we're gonna remove the alternator from the vehicle. This is a breakdown of how the alternator is hooked up. You got an upper bolt right here. That's a 14 millimeter. Now, below, you have a wing nut tensioner. And in conjunction with this wing nut tensioner, there's a bolt that we'll show in a minute, and that's a 12 millimeter. So before we show you underneath, the way you can feel for this bolt is if you grab hold of the alternator pulley and you go directly down with your middle finger, you can feel this. It's sort of it's got a tall head on it, and that's the bolt that works with the wing nut tensioner. So we're gonna show that now. We've removed the front driver's tire to show you that. You can also access the bolt from below. It's your preference. You can loosen it from above or below. Okay, so from below you can see that bolt better. I'm just gonna touch it once or twice with my finger so you can know which one. It's this one right here. So that's a shot of that bolt. You can get it from above or you can get it from below. It's your preference. But first we're gonna crack the upper bolt. So I'm gonna crack this upper bolt. It's a 14 millimeter. I'm using a 3/8 ratchet and a 14 millimeter deep socket. I'm just gonna loosen it about that much. Now I'm gonna crack the lower bolt, which is a 12 millimeter. Okay, so what I've done is I've stuck a 12 millimeter deep socket onto that bolt, and I'm gonna get my ratchet down there and hook up. Alright, I'm going to go about that far. We've had this apart recently and we put anti-seize on these components, so it's a little easier to take apart. You might need penetrating oil to do this because these can be kind of a pain. The bolt's still in there for now, and I'm going to work on the wing nut tensioner from above. Okay, so here's the other piece of the tensioning system. It's this big wing nut tensioner. Like I said, we've had this apart recently, so it has anti-seize on it, so I might get lucky and be able to start loosening this by hand. It's kind of an awkward angle with it at the front of the engine like this, but I'm going to first try it by hand, and if I can't, I'll show you what we did last time, because this is one of the hardest parts of this job, is this wing nut. So I'm going to come in with my hand. It's pretty awkward. I'm going to start spinning it, and I'm actually getting it. So the anti-seize was really helpful. I highly recommend using anti-seize after completing this job. I'll show you in a second what I did when we were taking this apart the first time to work on the belts, and I could not get this wing nut loose. Okay, so last time we had this apart, I had a lot of trouble loosening the wing nut tensioner. I could not turn it by hand. This is an awkward angle, it was seized. So what I ended up doing was I took a big socket. This one seems to slip over, but don't quote me on it. This is a 1-inch, and it's a 1/2-inch drive. All I did was use this. This is a 12 point. And I slipped it over the wing nut with a long ratchet, and I was able to turn the wing nut painstakingly. But that did work. You can get a socket over the wing nut if you have one big enough. Okay, so now we've loosened the upper 14mm bolt. We've loosened the lower 12mm bolt, which we've showed you from underneath, and we've loosened the wing nut tensioner in the front. With those loose, I'm gonna push down on the alternator. You should have movement now. It's not enough. So I'm gonna keep working on the wing nut tensioner until I can swing the alternator down towards the ground enough to where I can slip the belt off. So the more you undo the wing nut, the more swing downwards you're gonna have with the alternator. And so that's enough. So I'm slipping this belt off now. I'm gonna leave that down there. That belt connects usually the alternator, the AC compressor, and the crankshaft. This car's AC compressor does not function, so we bypassed the AC compressor and used a smaller belt to connect the alternator and the crankshaft only. I'm gonna go ahead and remove the upper alternator bolt. It's a 14mm. So I've almost trapped myself with a deep wall. I need to switch to a shorty. You can't take the bolt out. It's free, but I don't have enough room. It's running into to the side, so we're gonna work on the bottom. Okay, so now I'm removing this bolt entirely from the tensioning system. Just doing it by hand because it was already loose. Now you can see how it interacts with this tensioner. Here's the bolt. It's now totally free, and the tensioner is now splocked. Okay, so the alternator is pretty stuck. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna put a little penetrating oil where it's being squeezed on each side. And then I have a pry bar. I'm gonna put it right here. And there, I think it came free. So I'm gonna grab it and it should just finagle its way out. So it kind of came out pulley side up, just like that. Ooh, that's what it was. So we had charging issues. We ran through some water, and that, you can hear it, that bearing is shot. Okay, so you can get a good view now. So this is the, if you're looking down, this is the top of the alternator that you're looking down. Here's the tab that holds the electrical block, is what I'm gonna call it, on there. The upper bolt goes in through here. Battery cable, post, wiring harness clip, and then you have the lower mounting bolt down here. The upper one again is a 14mm, the lower one is a 12. So there it is, shot. Okay, this is a shot with the alternator out of the vehicle, just to give you another view. So you're looking down on it. You have the upper bolt and you have the lower. Here's the lower tensioning assembly. We have the wing nut tensioner towards the front of the vehicle, and then we have this bracket that screws, that threads onto the wing nut tensioner bolt, and this like ear tab that is going to be where you stick that 12 millimeter lower bolt through the ear tab, through this solid bracket, and then it's going to screw into the body of the alternator. Okay, this is the new alternator. This is one from Amazon. We're not sponsored and we're not even monetized, but this is a B-Dell. We haven't used one of these before. I can't speak for it. Made in China and something else in Mexico. So we're gonna give it a shot. So I stand corrected. They provided a new bracket for the electrical connection block. I don't know what you call that block. They gave us a new nut for the power post, and then you got your clip. So here's your upper. It's got like a metal sleeve in there, and then you got the lower, which is threaded. Feels all right. Looks all right. And we're gonna give it a shot. All right, so before doing anything, I'm gonna reapply anti-seize to the wing nut tensioning bolt, just for good measure. I'm gonna cover the entire bolt, because that really helped us out for this job. This is just your basic Permatex anti-seize lubricant. It's the gray stuff. Just give it a little mix, and I'm just gonna lazily slop it on there. If you want to, you can run the bolt through it in and out a couple times, but I'm not gonna bother. I just want it on the threads. So highly recommend that. So before putting it in the car, I'm gonna take this nut off and set it aside. Now looking down, easy. You're just gonna find whatever way it wants to go. Sort of pulley up the same way it came out. Finagle it down, and I'm gonna go ahead and stick the upper bolt through. Pull this bolt out. And I'm going to fit the alternator in between these two tabs. Okay, so one thing, I tried to fit this in there, but there's this little collar here. It's pressed in there, and it was interacting with this collar on this bigger bracket on the car. So I couldn't slip it in between these two big bracket tongues here. So what I had to do is I had to tap this collar in a little bit more with a hammer. And so if you get the same brand, maybe it'll be like that, maybe not. Maybe it'll be further in. But I'm gonna try to refit it now. Yeah, so now it fits. So just showing that again, I had to tap this little inner collar sleeve into the body of the alternator more to be able to get it in here to run this upper bolt through. Fish your threads in, and I'm just gonna get it started so you have total swing of the alternator, but now it's bolted. Okay, so I'm underneath here. You can do this from above, but you'll just have to kind of feel around in the dark. But this is the lower mounting bolt for the alternator. What I need to do is I need to fish it, go through this hole, into this channel, and then you can just see it. There's threads in the alternator itself. That's where your destination is. But I'm gonna go from above. Pull the alternator up this way so I can meet the bolt with the threads in the alternator. get that just like that by hand. Okay, so the alternator belt is the innermost belt on the crankshaft pulley. This would normally run the AC compressor, but ours does not function, so we're gonna bypass it. We have a shorter belt, so we're just gonna go right from the crankshaft up onto the alternator. So I have it on the alternator first, and then I'm just gonna come down and slip it around the crank. Okay, now with my left hand, I'm gonna pull up on the alternator towards me. And with my right hand, I'm gonna tighten the wing nut. So you'll need to tighten it quite a bit, so just keep going on the wing nut while holding tension. And this is gonna do the actual tensioning of the belt. And then the lower bolt is the lockout bolt. It's gonna save your tension that you set with this wing nut. I'm gonna go for about a 1/2 inch deflection on the belt. This is the other belt, but this is just to demonstrate. So when you pull on the belt from center, I'm gonna go for about a 1/2 inch deflection. I don't know what the service manual says, and don't quote me on this, but I'm just going for just a good feel, maybe a 1/2 inch deflection, just nice and snug. So then you can achieve that with the tensioner, the wing nut. I'm gonna go as far as I can by hand. And the more you pull up on the alternator, the easier the wing nut will be to turn. Okay, now when you have it to where you like it, you can come from above or go underneath. You're gonna use the lower bolt to lock out the tension that you've set. And you're gonna just tighten that bolt good and tight. Okay, this is from below. I'm using a deep well 12mm. So you lock that out and then double check your tension. Just about there, that's fine. Double check it. Just good and tight. Okay, I'm back on top. I'm using a short 14mm and a 3/8 ratchet. I'm finishing out this bolt. So I'm gonna recheck the tension on the belt, and that seems fine to me. So everything is tight now on the alternator. So the next thing we need to do is rehook up the battery cable and the harness clip. And I'm gonna reconnect the harness clip. The tab faces to the left. Slip it over and click it in. And recover it with the boot. Now I'm gonna take a nut and I'm gonna tighten the battery cable onto I'm gonna get it started on the post. Now I'm gonna slip this little junction box thing back onto the tab, and it just, you can barely hear it, but it snaps into place, and that's on there. So now I'm going to take a 10mm shorty socket and ratchet and tighten that nut. Okay, now put the boot back over the post. That's it. Now we're on the power steering pump. Again, here's the power steering pump. This is the bracket for the power steering fluid reservoir. This is a 12mm. So there's a tongue. There's a tab on the bottom that fits into a little square under the bowl hole. You can't miss it. Okay, now we're gonna pull the whole assembly back down over the pump and the reservoir. I'm gonna leave the reservoir off of the bracket for now. Rest that in there. Right here with this channel, that's what accepts the lower bolt. It's the lower bolt that's gonna come in from the left side through that channel and into the bottom ear of the power steering pump. Like that. So from here you can see right there. That's where you're gonna thread this nut on. 12 millimeter. It's a tight squeeze, but you can get your hand in there and just get that nut started. Like that. And so here's the top again. This bolt is going to go through from the right, through the upper ear of the power steering pump and through this channel for this bracket. Like that. On the back side of that is this nut with a washer. Now this small bracket threads right onto here. Just get that finger tight, 10 millimeter, and then this wing nut tensioner is going to go through the bracket, and we're just going to get this started in there. So everything is connected, and now we're going to work on the belt. And then I'm going to feed it up to myself. I hold it in my left hand, make sure it's on the bottom, and I'm going to slip it over the pulley. Alright, now what we're going to do is we're going to pull up on the body of the power steering pump, and we're going to run this wing nut tensioner down. Get a little, just snug like that, everything's stationary. What I'm going to do is I'm going to tighten this 10 millimeter. I just have a wrench handy, so I'm going to use a wrench. Okay, I'm going to hold the body of the power steering pump again. Pull upwards on a little bit. I'm going to make sure the belt's straight. I'm going to tighten that by hand, and I'm going to check the tension on the belt. I think I could go a little more. So yeah, pull up. The more you pull up, the easier it'll be to tighten that wing nut. And I like that. Okay, so we're done with the wing nut. What we're going to do is tighten this nut. We're going to tighten the nut on the other end of the upper bolt. 12 millimeter wrench. And we're going to lock out the tensioner. I have my other hand on the belt. I'm making sure that everything stays where I want it as far as tension. And now we just have one more. We have the lower bolt to tighten now. It's a shorty 12. That's tight. Just recheck your belts. Check both of them. They both feel good. So now we're gonna slip the power steering fluid reservoir back onto this tongue bracket. That's down there like that. And we are done. We're gonna put the battery in and check that the new alternator is putting out the correct voltage. Okay, we're just throwing the battery back in. This right one is the positive. It's marked on there. Left one's a negative. You can go ahead and tighten them if you want, but I'm just gonna stick them on there. We're gonna start it and check it with a multimeter. All right, car's running. We have the multimeter set to volts DC on 20. As you can see, we're now getting over 14 volts, 14.3, which is what we want. Okay, just to finish up, a couple key takeaways. If you can, jack the car up, or if you have a lift, we do recommend removing the driver's side front tire for easier access to underneath. You can do this job from above. You'll just have to feel your way around. If you take the wheel off, you have to take this like splash shield off that covers the crank. This one was already off, so we didn't have to do that. We have to take the wheel off, and then that's that splash shield. If you put new belts on it, run the car, drive a little bit, or just run it for 10 minutes, and you'll have to check your belt tension, because your new belts will stretch a little bit, so you might have to retension your belts if they're new. And that's it. Good luck.